story, a story, a story. Let's tell a story that happened long ago. Let's tell a story, a tale of the lion and a mouse. It's a bedtime story you should know.
I do know it, Shari.
Okay, Lamb Chop, then I'll tell you another.
Make it my favorite.
Which one is that?
The Lion and the Mouse.
Isn't that what I said?
Oh, yeah, there must be an echo around here.
Okay, here's your first bedtime story.
Excuse me.
What, Lamb Chop?
Why do they call them bedtime stories?
They're supposed to put you to sleep.
A story that puts me to sleep, I don't call it bedtime story.
What do you call it?
I call it boring.
Not these bedtime stories. The Lion and the Mouse. One day, a mouse was walking near a lion's lair. That's what they call a lion's cave. He makes his home in there. The lion sprang upon the mouse, grabbed it in his paws. The big cat sniffed the little mouse and opened up his jaws. The mouse said,
"Someday, sir, you may need a favor too. And if you're kind to me right now, then I'll be kind to you."
The lion laughed. "You're much too small to be of use to me." But on a whim, he put him down. "Okay," he smiled, "you're free." The little mouse said,
"Thank you, sir,"
scampered out of sight. Do you know the day came when the mouse proved he was right? For the lion was caught in a hunter's net, and he roared, "Oh me, oh my!" The mouse, out with the wife and kids, happened to be strolling by. The mouse chewed a hole in the hunter's net so big, I'm telling you, an entire troop of elephants could have gotten through. From that day on, the lion and the mouse were the closest of friends. They lived happily ever after, and that's the way the story ends.
Why does the cat wash after eating?
A long time ago, there was a polite pussycat who was proud of having good manners. One day, he caught a sparrow for his dinner. "How do you do?" he said politely to the bird. "Please excuse me for eating you up, but I'm hungry." He was about to pop this bird into his mouth and eat it, feathers and all, when suddenly the sparrow spoke.
"My dear sir, a real gentleman does not eat without first washing his hands and face. If you were really a courteous cat with fine manners, you'd wash first, too."
Well, the cat thought about what the bird had said, and he agreed. He put down the sparrow, began to lick his paws and rub them over his whiskers, but the moment he let go of the bird, it flew away, and the cat had to do without dinner. Well, he was so mad at being tricked by that spunky sparrow that he said, "Gentleman or no gentleman, as long as I live, I will eat first and wash afterward." That's what he taught his children to do, and that's what all cats do to this very day. Sinbad and the Genie. Sinbad the sailor, strolling on the beach, came upon a bottle washed up on the sand. Inside was a teeny-weeny green genie pleading,
"Please let me out. I have been in here for 1,000 years.
So Sinbad pulled out the stopper, and a great cloud of green smoke poured forth and grew into a giant-sized genie, who said, "I haven't eaten for 1,000 years. I'm going to eat you for breakfast." Now Sinbad was brave and strong, but what could he do against a giant? He said, "How can a little thing like you eat me?" "Little, I am gigantic." "Gigantic," said Sinbad. "Come on, you fit into that bottle." "I changed my shape, can't you see that?" "Nobody can change his shape," laughed Sinbad. The giant couldn't stand it. "I did so change my shape. I'll prove it." And he turned himself back into green smoke. He slithered back into the bottle. Sinbad popped the stopper into the bottle and threw it out to sea to float for another 1,000 years. Rumpelstiltskin. A miller bragged to the king, "My daughter can spin straw into gold." So the king locked the miller's daughter in a room filled with straw and a spinning wheel, and said, "If you can spin this straw into gold by morning, you'll be my queen. If not, you'll die." The girl began to cry, but suddenly a little man appeared and said,
"I'll spin your straw into gold if you'll give me your first child."
The girl said yes, so he spun the straw into gold and disappeared. Thrilled, the king made the miller's daughter his queen, and a year later they had a son. But when the little man came to take the child, the queen was heartbroken, so he said,
"If you can find out what my name is, you may keep your son."
The queen sent out a messenger who reported, "I heard someone chanting, 'The queen's in a mess, now ain't that a shame? She'll never guess Rumpelstiltskin's my name.'" So when the little man appeared, the queen said, "Is your name Rumpelstiltskin?" That made Rumpelstiltskin so mad, he stamped his foot right through the floor and disappeared forevermore. Rip Van Winkle. Once in the mountain town of Sleepy Hollow, Rip Van Winkle set off with his dog for a day of hunting. In the woods, he came upon some tiny men playing ninepins.
What's that?
Like bowling, Lamb-chop. They invited Rip to play, and he did. He also joined the tiny men as they drank wine, and after several drinks, he fell asleep. When he awoke, he found that his clothes had turned to rags, his gun was rusted, his dog gone, and he had grown a long beard that fell all the way to the ground. Puzzled, he returned home, only to find that his little boy had become a big man, and everyone he had ever known was either dead or grown old. Rip was rattled to realize he had slept for over 20 years. For the rest of his life, he searched for those tiny men.
Did he find them?
No, Lamb-chop. But when thunder echoed through the valley, Rip knew it was really the crash of the ninepins as the tiny men played high in the hills surrounding the town of Sleepy Hollow. The Sorcerer's Apprentice. A lazy boy got a job working as the apprentice to a magic sorcerer. One day, the boy heard the magician say magic words to a broom. The broom sprouted arms, picked up a bucket, hopped to a stream, and returned with a bucket full of water. Not long after, the sorcerer went out to do an errand and told the apprentice to scrub the floors while he was gone. But the lazy boy decided he needed help, and remembering the spell, he said the magic words and the broom sprouted arms, hopped to the stream, fetched water, and poured it on the floor. Happy, the boy began to scrub the floor, but the broom fetched more water, threw it on the floor and left, and over again the broom did this, and the apprentice couldn't stop it. And just as the boy was about to drown and the house float away, the sorcerer returned. Furious, he clapped his hands, and whee! The broom disappeared, the water disappeared, and the apprentice disappeared too. Little Red Riding Hood. Red Riding Hood started to Grandma's with wine and fruit and cake. In the woods, she talked to a wolf who was strolling near the lake.
I'm going to my grandma's house with wine to quench her thirst.
In a flash, the wolf had disappeared. That wolf got to Grandma's first. The wolf threw Grandma in the closet, hopped into her bed. When Little Red got to Grandma's, the wolf was there instead. The wolf was dressed in Grandma's clothes, her house coat, her wig.
Oh, Grandma, said Red Riding Hood, your ears are very big.
The better to hear you, said the wolf. The better to hear you laugh.
Your nose is grown, said Riding Hood. It's bigger by more than half.
The better to smell you, said the wolf, with a gruesome grin. My mouth is bigger too, and now I'm gonna pop you in. And then with a shout he showed his teeth and jumped up out of bed. But nearby a hunter heard the shout. That hunter shot the wolf dead. This story's not my favorite tale, because the ending's gory. But the hunter had to shoot the wolf, because that's always the end of the story. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Once, packs of hungry wolves roamed the hills. The lone shepherds who guarded the sheep decided that if one of them should see a wolf, he would call, "Wolf, wolf!" and the others would come running with clubs and noisemakers to frighten the animals away. One shepherd boy thought it would be a funny joke if he were to call, "Wolf, wolf!" during the night when everybody was asleep.
Yeah, that's funny.
And so he did. Of course, everyone came running in their pajamas, all ready for trouble.
But there was no trouble.
When the other shepherds realized they had been awakened for a joke, they shook their fists angrily at the prankster. Unfortunately, the next night, a pack of wolves really did attack the young shepherd's flock. In panic, he cried, "Wolf! Wolf!" But the other shepherds, not wanting to be made fools again, merely went back to sleep. Nobody came to help the shepherd boy, who lost all his sheep that night because he had cried wolf for the fun of it.
The stories on this side are gone, but turn us over and we'll go on.
Pinocchio. Geppetto carved a puppet, called it Pinocchio, and then wished upon a star that his puppet would become a real boy. And sure enough, life was breathed into the wooden Pinocchio. Next day, instead of going to school, Pinocchio ran away with Stromboli's puppet show. Stromboli was mean. He put Pinocchio in a cage. Pinocchio wished upon that same star and found himself back at his father's door. But Geppetto was not there. The old man had gone sailing off to look for his missing son, Pinocchio. After searching everywhere, Pinocchio discovered Geppetto and his sailboat in the belly of a whale. To get them out, he set fire to the boat. The smoke made the whale sneeze, which blew them out of the whale's belly and onto the shore. The story ends on the very day Pinocchio decided he'd be good and told Geppetto that he'd go to school just as he should. Why, he became a real boy, no longer made of wood. Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan was the hero of many American tall tales. He was a giant lumberjack and had many lumberjacks working for him who were huge men with gigantic appetites. They all had to be fed, so he built a cooking grill that was 24 city blocks long and 18 blocks wide. The smokestacks on this stove were so tall he had to hinge it so the moon could pass by. The cook rode a big bucking bronco to get from one end of the grill to the other, and it took a team of farm horses to pull the wagon, holding the salt and pepper across the table. Paul had 200 cooks cooking for him day and night, but they couldn't turn over enough pancakes to feed all the lumberjacks. So Paul put a piece of popcorn in each pancake, and when they were cooked on one side, they popped into the air and flipped themselves. They were flipjacks, not flapjacks, right? A bell for the cat. A miller, looking for a place to grind his kernels of wheat into flour, found a nice old mill, but the mill was overrun with mice. They nibbled his wheat and dirtied his flour, so the miller bought a large cat who killed and ate many of the small creatures. The frightened mice called a mass mouse meeting. The wise old mouse spoke up, "Let's put a brass bell around this killer cat's neck. Then when he moves, we'll hear him and we'll be able to run and hide." "Make it a big brass bell," piped another. "And let's tie the big brass bell with a big blue bow," squealed another. They all cheered until a tiny mouse said, "Which one of you guys will hang the bell around the cat's neck?" Sudden silence. Since no one was brave enough to volunteer, the mass mouse meeting quickly broke up. The next day the mice moved away from the old mill, and neither the miller nor the miller's cat ever saw them again. The man who buried his money. Once a man with bags of gold arrived at an inn in a strange town. Afraid someone would steal his gold, he asked where he could hide it. The innkeeper said, "Bury your gold in the dry well in the yard. Nobody ever goes into that well, and your money will be safe." So the man buried his gold and went to sleep. But in the middle of the night, the innkeeper sneaked down to the well and stole the gold himself. Next morning, the man looked in the well. His gold was gone. He realized he'd been tricked. Pretending not to know the gold was gone, he said to the innkeeper, "I made some more gold today. Shall I bury it in the same place where I buried the rest?" The greedy innkeeper wanted this new load of gold too, so he said, "Yes." And then he took the man's gold from the place where he had hidden it and buried it back in the well, so the man wouldn't find it missing when he came to leave the new riches he had made. And that night, the traveler went to the well, dug up all his gold, and left. Dummling and the Golden Goose. A sad princess never laughed, so the king said, "Anyone who can make my daughter laugh can take her for his wife." But nobody could. In town, a boy named Dummling owned a magical golden goose. One day, Dummling was walking with the goose tucked under his arm, and a robber tried to grab the magic goose. But when the robber touched it, he stuck to the goose. The robber's girlfriend tried to pull the robber loose from the goose, but when she touched the robber, she found herself stuck. A policeman tried to stop them, but he stuck to the girl. At that moment, the sad princess saw Dummling with the goose under his arm, followed by the robber stuck to the goose, the girlfriend stuck to the robber, and the policeman stuck to the girl. It was such a funny sight. She laughed and laughed, and her laughter filled the castle. And when the king heard it, Dummling got to marry the princess, and for all I know, the rest of the guys are still stuck to that sticky golden goose. The Grasshopper and the Ants. Grasshopper was a terrific fiddler, and he didn't want to do anything other than play his violin all day, every day. And all summer, the hard-working ants told him to gather food for himself, as they were doing.
Winter will soon be here, and there'll be no food just lying around as there is during these warm summer months.
But Grasshopper simply fiddled the days away. Of course, winter did come. Snow covered the ground, and that grasshopper became hungry. One cold day, the ants found him trying to eat his violin. They took pity on him, carried him to their anthill home, and all that winter, the ants shared with the grasshopper the food that they had worked so hard to gather during those warm summer days. It was embarrassing to the grasshopper, but he learned one thing. It's fine to fiddle around when the sun is shining, but you gotta put something away for a winter's day. The King's New Clothes. Two dishonest men told a king they could weave beautiful clothing that could not be seen by silly fools, but could only be seen by wise people. The king, pleased that they thought him wise, gave them gold to weave him such a suit. The men pretended to weave, but really only moved their hands back and forth, and at last they brought what was supposed to be the finished suit to the king. He could see nothing, of course, because there was nothing there, but he pretended to button up the jacket so's not to be thought a silly fool. Then he ordered a parade. The people who lined the streets could not see the king's new clothes, but not wanting to be thought fools, said nothing until one little child yelled, "Daddy, the king is naked!" When the king heard the child, he knew it was true. He ran back to his castle, but by then the dishonest men were gone, the gold was gone, and the king was left with a suit of clothes that never was there in the first place. The Ugly Duckling. There was a duckling so ugly that when he tried to play with the other ducklings, they would say, "Yuck, what a duck!" Made him sad. Even Mother Duck couldn't stand to see his large beak and listen to his loud squawk. She quacked, "Go away, you ugly duckling!" Broken-hearted, the little duckling waddled away, and through the winter, the poor duckling had neither family nor friends against which to huddle. He almost froze, and then it was spring. The duckling decided to try to find a pond where he could be happy. His wings had grown over the winter, and he flew until he saw, in a pond below, beautiful swans with long necks. The duckling landed on the pond, and when he did, he saw his own reflection in the water. He was not an ugly duckling at all, but had grown into a beautiful swan, like the others in the pond. They all came over to greet their new friend, and at last the ugly duckling had found his home. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. A girl had milked her cow, and, walking to town to sell the milk, was balancing the pail on her head. As she walked, she said to herself, "This pail of milk is going to make me enough money to buy 8 eggs. I'll take the eggs and put them under my 4 best hens. In no time, the eggs will hatch into 8 chicks. The chicks will grow into big, fat hens, and they'll lay dozens of eggs that will hatch into chickens, too. And then I'll take all the chickens and sell them, and I'll buy myself the fanciest dress in the world, so I can go to the nicest parties. At the parties, everyone will ask me to dance, and I'll dance and twirl." And as she talked, she gave a little hop and a step, but when she started to twirl, the milk pail on her head was thrown off balance, the milk was spilled, and her plans were spoiled. "Would you look at what a dumb thing I've done," she said. "I counted my chickens before they hatched."